It was a Tuesday evening in November when my world shattered into 1,000 pieces. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. I'd just pulled his favorite apple pie from the oven, the same recipe I'd been making for 32 years. Steam rose from the golden crust as I set it on the cooling rack, my hands trembling slightly from anticipation. I'd been planning this dinner for weeks, hoping it would bridge the growing distance between us. Michael stood in the doorway, his tall frame casting a shadow across the worn linoleum floor. His eyes, once so warm, so full of love, now held something cold, something final. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, broken only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of evening traffic through our Ohio neighborhood. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but distant. I turned to face him, wiping flour from my apron, expecting maybe a complaint about work or his latest relationship troubles. Instead, what came next would replay in my mind for months to come. "You're not my mother anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The pie continued cooling behind me. The kitchen clock kept ticking. But everything else, my breath, my heartbeat, my very existence, seemed to pause. I felt my face freeze in shock. Then slowly, inexplicably, a smile began to form at the corners of my mouth, not because I was happy, not because I understood, but because in that moment something deep inside me recognized that this was the end of one story and perhaps the beginning of another. I didn't fight back. I didn't scream or cry or beg him to explain. I just smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that seemed to come from somewhere beyond my conscious mind. And in that silence, I saw something flicker across his face. Confusion. Maybe even regret. But it was too late. The words had been spoken, and we both knew there was no taking them back. The memory of that moment still catches me off guard sometimes. But to understand how we got there, I need to take you back to where it all began. Back to a small apartment on the east side of Cincinnati, where a 23-year-old woman named Margaret, that's me, was learning what it meant to be a mother, with nothing but determination and love to guide her. Michael's father had disappeared before his first birthday, leaving nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. I remember holding my baby boy in that cramped apartment, the paint peeling from the walls, the heater that only worked when it felt like it. Snow was falling outside, and I could see my breath in the frigid air. But Michael was warm in my arms, sleeping peacefully, trusting me completely to keep him safe. That trust became my driving force. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., I'd wake up to the sound of my alarm clock, a harsh mechanical buzz that became the soundtrack to my new life. I'd feed Michael, bundle him up, and carry him 6 blocks through the snow to Mrs. Henderson's house, where she watched him for almost nothing because she knew I was trying my best. Then I'd catch the 6:15 bus to the diner where I waitressed the breakfast shift. Coffee-stained aprons, aching feet, and the smell of bacon grease that would cling to my hair for hours. But every tip, every smile from a customer, every "thank you, honey," meant another day I could provide for my son. After the morning shift, I'd rush to my second job at the department store, folding clothes and helping customers find the perfect outfit while wearing shoes with holes in the soles. My hands were always dry from the cheap soap in the employee restroom, and my back ached from standing for 12 hours straight. But when customers would compliment my service or when my manager praised my work ethic, I'd think about Michael's future, about the college fund I was slowly building with every extra shift. Evenings were sacred. I'd pick up Michael, tired but determined to give him the attention he deserved. We'd sit on the floor of our little apartment. I'd sold most of our furniture to pay for groceries, and I'd read to him from library books. His favorite was about a little engine that could. "I think I can. I think I can," became our family motto during those lean years. Dinner was often pasta with whatever vegetables I could afford, but I made it feel special. I'd light a candle, not for romance, but because the overhead light had burned out, and I couldn't afford to replace the bulb until payday. Michael would clap his little hands at the flickering flame, and in those moments, our tiny apartment felt like a palace. Weekends meant laundry at the laundromat, where Michael would press his nose against the glass of the washing machines, mesmerized by the spinning clothes. Other mothers would chat about their husbands' jobs or their weekend plans, while I'd sit quietly, folding our few belongings with careful precision, making everything last as long as possible. When Michael started school, I took on a third job, cleaning offices at night. I'd walk the empty hallways at midnight, pushing a cart full of supplies, thinking about his teacher's comments that he was bright, that he had potential, that with the right support, he could go anywhere. Those words fueled me through the exhaustion, through the loneliness, through the moments when I questioned if I was strong enough for this life I'd chosen. Christmas was the hardest. Other kids talked about their long lists for Santa, while I carefully saved for one special gift that would make Michael's eyes light up. The year he turned 8, I worked overtime for 3 months to buy him a bicycle. Second-hand, but painted bright blue with new tires. The look on his face, Christmas morning, made every sacrifice worth it. But somewhere along the way, things began to shift. It started so subtly that I barely noticed at first. Michael, now in high school, stopped running to the door when I came home from work. The excited "Mom" that used to greet me was replaced by a distracted "Hey" from behind his homework. I told myself it was normal. Teenagers needed space, needed to find their independence. The gratitude that had once filled his voice when I'd surprise him with his favorite meal slowly faded into expectation. The bicycle I'd saved for months to buy became just another thing in the garage. The stories I'd tell him about our struggles became ancient history that he'd heard too many times. I watched him make new friends, kids from families where money wasn't a constant worry. He'd come home talking about their vacations, their new cars, their college funds that existed without years of sacrifice behind them. I started to notice him looking around our small house, the same house I'd finally been able to buy after years of saving, with what seemed like embarrassment. "Why can't we live somewhere nicer?" he asked one day, standing in our modest kitchen. The question hit me harder than I expected. I looked around at the space I'd worked so hard to call ours, at the walls I'd painted myself, at the table where we'd shared countless meals and homework sessions. "This house represents everything good in our lives," I told him softly. "Every payment I made on it was made with love for you." But he just shrugged and walked away, leaving me standing alone with the weight of his disappointment. The criticism started small. My cooking wasn't as good as his friend Jake's mom's cooking. My car was embarrassing compared to the SUVs other parents drove. The clothes I wore to his school events weren't fashionable enough, weren't impressive enough for the image he wanted to project. Each comment was like a paper cut, small, but accumulating into something that stung constantly. I found myself second-guessing everything. Maybe the casserole I'd made wasn't sophisticated enough. Maybe I should have bought the name-brand shoes instead of the practical ones. Maybe I wasn't enough. Had never been enough. The phone calls became less frequent when he went to college. I'd wait by the phone on Sundays, hoping to hear his voice, to know how his classes were going, to share in his excitement about his future. When he did call, the conversations grew shorter, more functional. "I need money for books." "My meal plan is running low." "The car needs new tires." I sent what I could, often choosing between his needs and my own. When my coat finally gave, out after 15 years, I wore it another winter because Michael needed help with his security deposit for an apartment. When my shoes developed holes, I put cardboard inside them because his textbooks were expensive that semester. His friends started influencing him more than my voice ever could. I'd hear about their families' success stories, their parents' careers, their impressive connections. Slowly, I began to feel like a relic from his past, rather than a foundation for his future. The first time he forgot my birthday, I made excuses for him. College was stressful. He had exams. He was busy building his life. But when it happened again the next year, and then again, I started to understand that I was no longer a priority in the life I'd spent everything building. When he brought girlfriends home, I noticed how he'd introduce me. Not with pride, not with the stories of our journey together, but with a casual, almost dismissive tone. "This is my mom." No mention of the years of sacrifice, no acknowledgement of the strength it had taken to raise him alone. Just a simple introduction, as if I were no more significant than a distant relative. The breaking point came during his graduation. I'd saved, for months to attend, to see my son walk across that stage and receive the diploma that represented everything we'd worked for together. I wore my best dress, the one I'd bought 5 years earlier for my cousin's wedding, and felt proud to be there. But when Michael saw me in the crowd, I caught something in his expression that made my stomach drop. Not pride, not joy at sharing this moment with me, but something that looked almost like embarrassment. When his girlfriend's wealthy parents invited us to dinner afterward, Michael seemed uncomfortable introducing me, as if my presence somehow diminished his achievement. That night, alone in my hotel room, I stared at myself in the mirror and wondered when I had become someone my son was ashamed of. The woman looking back at me had worked herself thin, had given everything she had, and somehow had become an embarrassment rather than a source of pride. The months after graduation brought fewer calls, shorter visits, and an increasing sense that I was becoming a burden rather than a blessing in his life. When Michael started his new job in the city, 3 hours away, I told myself the distance was temporary, that once he settled in, things would return to normal. But normal never came. Instead, our relationship continued to deteriorate in small, painful increments. He'd visit for holidays but spend most of his time on his phone or making plans with friends. When I'd try to talk about our shared memories, about the journey we'd taken together, he'd change the subject or seem annoyed by what he called my nostalgia. The final straw came during Christmas dinner the year before that terrible November evening. I'd spent days preparing his favorite meal, decorating the house the way I had when he was young, trying to recreate the magic we'd once shared. But Michael spent most of the dinner criticizing everything. The food was too simple. The decorations were outdated. The house felt depressing compared to his friends' family celebrations. "Mom," he said, pushing back from the table, "you need to move on with your life. This whole thing where you live in the past, where everything revolves around me, it's not healthy." I sat there, stunned. Living in the past? Everything I'd done had been about building his future. Moving on with my life? My life had been dedicated to his success, to his happiness, to giving him opportunities I'd never had. That night, after he'd left to spend the rest of his holiday with friends, I sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by the remnants of a meal no one had appreciated, and felt something inside me begin to change. Not break, change, like a caterpillar dissolving in its cocoon, not knowing what it would become, but sensing that transformation was inevitable. The months that followed were a strange kind of awakening. For the first time in over 30 years, I began to ask myself questions I'd never considered. Who was Margaret outside of being Michael's mother? What did I want that had nothing to do with anyone else's dreams or needs or expectations? I started small. I enrolled in a painting class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. My first canvas was terrible, but there was something magical about creating something that was entirely mine, something that existed simply because I wanted it to exist. I joined a book club where women discussed novels and philosophy and shared stories about their own journeys. For the first time in decades, I had conversations that weren't about Michael's needs or achievements. I discovered that I had opinions about literature, about politics, about life that had nothing to do with motherhood. Slowly, I began to see that the woman I'd been before Michael was born, the one with dreams and ambitions and her own identity, had never really disappeared. She'd been buried under years of sacrifice and service. But she was still there, waiting to be rediscovered. I started exercising not to impress anyone, but because I wanted to feel strong in my own body. I bought new clothes that I liked, not because they were practical or modest or appropriate for a mother, but because they made me feel beautiful. I painted my nails red, bright, bold red, because it made me smile every time I looked at my hands. And then came that November evening when Michael appeared in my kitchen doorway with words that would have destroyed the old Margaret, the one who existed only in relation to her son's needs and approval. But I wasn't that woman anymore. When he said, "You're not my mother anymore," something inside me remained calm, even peaceful, because I had discovered that I was so much more than just his mother. I was Margaret, a woman with her own dreams, her own worth, her own life to live. The smile that came to my face in that moment wasn't born of sadness or resignation. It was born of a deep, quiet knowledge that no one, not even the son I'd sacrificed everything for, could take away who I was at my core. After Michael left that night, I sat in my kitchen with the cooling apple pie and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Relief. Not relief that he was gone, but relief that the pretending was over. Relief that I could stop trying to be small enough to fit into his increasingly narrow vision of who I should be. I served myself a slice of pie and ate it slowly, savoring the cinnamon and the flaky crust and the sweetness that I had created with my own hands. It was delicious, not because anyone else appreciated it, but because I could taste the love and skill and care I'd put into making it. The following months brought a kind of freedom I'd forgotten was possible. I traveled for the first time in my adult life, taking a bus tour to Yellowstone National Park and marveling at geysers and hot springs and landscapes that existed in stunning beauty without needing anyone's approval or validation. I made new friends, people who knew me as Margaret, not as Michael's mother. They appreciated my sense of humor, my thoughtful questions, my ability to listen and offer wisdom gained from years of quiet observation. I discovered that I was actually quite good at friendship when I wasn't constantly worried about someone else's needs. My painting improved dramatically. I found that I had a natural eye for color and composition, and my instructor encouraged me to enter a local art show. When my painting won second place, I felt a pride that was entirely my own, not reflected glory from someone else's achievements, but recognition of something I had created and accomplished myself. I even went on a few dates. something that would have seemed impossible when my entire identity was wrapped up in being the perfect mother. One man, a kind widower named Robert, appreciated my stories and my strength, and seemed genuinely interested in who I was as a person. We took long walks and talked about books and shared quiet dinners where no one criticized the food or the atmosphere or my choices. But the universe, it seems, has its own sense of timing and justice. It was almost exactly 1 year later when my phone rang on a Wednesday evening. The number was familiar, Michael's, but we hadn't spoken since that night in November. My heart jumped. Old habits of worry and love still strong, despite everything that had happened. His voice was different when I answered, smaller somehow, uncertain. "Mom?" he said, and I could hear something in that single word that took me back to when he was 7 years old and had fallen off his bicycle, calling for me to make the pain go away. "Hello, Michael," I said gently, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. He started, then stopped. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel him struggling with words that had never come easily to him. "I lost my job, and Sarah left me, and I don't know what to do." The old Margaret would have immediately offered to drive 3 hours to comfort him, would have sent money, would have dropped everything to fix his problems. But this Margaret, the one who had learned her own worth over the past year, responded differently. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "That sounds really difficult." Silence stretched between us. I think he was waiting for me to offer solutions, to take control, to become the mother who fixes everything. But I waited, letting him find his own words. "I've been thinking," he continued, his voice becoming even smaller, "about things I said, about how I treated you." I closed my eyes and felt something shift inside my chest. Not the desperate hope I might have felt before, but something quieter, more sustainable. Compassion, perhaps. Or maybe just the recognition that growth and understanding often come through suffering. "I remember everything, Michael," I said softly. "I was wrong," he said, and I could hear tears in his voice now. "I was so wrong about everything. About you. About what you did for me. About what really matters." I sat in my peaceful living room, redecorated with colors I loved, filled with books I wanted to read and paintings I'd created, and felt neither vindicated nor victorious, just sad for the time we'd lost and the pain we'd both endured. "I know," I said simply. Would it be okay if I came home for a while? Just until I figure things out." The old Margaret would have said yes immediately, would have started planning meals and clearing out space and preparing to resume her role as the solution to all his problems. But this Margaret had learned something crucial about love and boundaries, and self-respect. "You're welcome to visit," I said carefully. "But this is my home now, and I have my own life. If you come, it will be as an adult visiting another adult, not as a child expecting to be taken care of." Another long pause. Then, in a voice I hadn't heard from him since he was young, he said, "I understand, and Mom, I'm really, really sorry." When Michael arrived 3 days later, I barely recognized him. The confident young man who had looked me in the eye and disowned me had been replaced by someone humbler, more uncertain, but somehow more genuine. He stood on my doorstep, with a single suitcase, looking around at the neighborhood where he'd grown up with what seemed like new eyes. "It looks different," he said as I invited him in. "Everything does when you see it clearly," I replied. Over the next few days, we moved around each other carefully, like strangers learning to share space. I continued my regular routines, my painting class, my book club, my walks with Robert, while Michael processed his own situation. I cooked meals that I enjoyed, and he was welcome to share them. But I didn't plan menus around his preferences or adjust my schedule to accommodate his needs. At first, he seemed confused by this new dynamic. The mother he remembered would have dropped everything to focus on his crisis, would have made his problems the center of her universe. But I had learned that love doesn't require self-erasure, that caring for someone doesn't mean disappearing into their needs. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Michael appeared in the kitchen with a dish towel in his hands. "Can I help?" he asked quietly. It was such a small gesture, but it represented something enormous. The first time in years that he had offered to contribute, rather than simply receive. As we washed dishes together, he began to talk. Really talk, not just recite accomplishments or make complaints, but share his actual thoughts and feelings. "I was embarrassed by our life," he said, his hands moving slowly through the soapy water. "I thought that meant there was something wrong, with you, with us. But it wasn't about you at all. It was about me being ashamed of not having what other people had." I dried a plate carefully, choosing my words with equal care. "I understand that," I said, "but understanding why you did something doesn't erase the impact it had." He nodded, tears sliding down his cheeks now. "I know. I threw away the most important relationship in my life because I was too stupid to see its value." "Not stupid," I corrected gently. "Young, influenced by a culture that measures worth by material success rather than love and character, but also responsible for your choices, regardless of the influences." We finished the dishes in companionable silence, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to my son, rather than to a stranger who happened to share our history. Over the following weeks, Michael slowly began to understand the woman I had become. He saw me leave for painting class and return energized and happy. He met Robert when he came to pick me up for dinner, and I watched Michael's surprise at seeing me as someone worthy of romantic attention. He observed my confidence, my independence, my ability to create joy for myself without relying on anyone else's approval or presence. One afternoon, he found me in my makeshift studio, working on a landscape painting of the Ohio countryside, where we'd taken walks when he was young. "It's beautiful," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "Thank you," I replied, continuing to work on the golden light filtering through trees. "I never knew you could paint." I paused, brush in midair, and looked at him thoughtfully. "There are a lot of things you never knew about me. For a long time, I forgot them myself." He was quiet for several minutes, watching me work. "I'm proud of you," he said finally, and something in his tone made me set down my brush and really look at him. "For what?" "For becoming who you are, for not letting what I did destroy you, for figuring out how to be happy." It was the first time in years that his pride in me had nothing to do with how well I had served his needs, and everything to do with recognizing my worth as an individual. Michael stayed for 6 weeks while he sorted out his job situation and found a new apartment. During that time, we rebuilt our relationship on completely different terms. Instead of the dynamic where I gave and he took, we learned to be two adults who cared about each other, but maintained their own identities and boundaries. When he finally left, our goodbye was different too. Instead of the guilt-laden departures of the past, where I would cling and worry and make him responsible for my emotional well-being, we hugged with mutual respect and genuine affection. "I love you, Mom," he said, and the words carried a weight they hadn't held in years. "I love you too," I replied, "and I'm proud of the man you're becoming." "Will you call me?" he asked, a question that would have seemed impossible a year earlier when he was avoiding my calls. "I'll call when I have something to share," I said with a smile. "And you call when you want to talk, not when you need something." He laughed, understanding the difference immediately. As I watched his car disappear down the street, I felt a completeness that had nothing to do with his presence or absence. I was whole, not because my son had returned to me, but because I had returned to myself. That evening I sat in my garden with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." I smiled and put the phone aside without responding immediately. There would be time for conversations, for building this new relationship we'd discovered. But right now, I wanted to simply exist in this moment of peace, surrounded by the life I had created for myself. The woman who had smiled that November evening when her son disowned her had known something the old Margaret couldn't have imagined, that love is not diminished by boundaries, that worth is not determined by others' approval, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is refusing to enable their worst impulses. True love, I learned, doesn't disappear when someone tries to throw it away. It transforms, becomes stronger and more authentic. And real self-worth means never letting anyone else, not even the people we love most, define our value or dictate our happiness. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is smile and let people face the consequences of their choices, trusting that the truth will eventually find its way to the surface. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, those we love will find their way back too, not as recipients of our sacrifice, but as fellow travelers on the journey of becoming who we're meant to be.